Welcome back to St Mary's Field Museum. So this is a space where we're able to invite the public in to find out a little bit more about the work that we're doing here at the site of St Mary's in Stoke Mandeville. And in this film, we're actually going to bring you up to date with what we've been doing, and we're also going to go and meet some of the archaeologists who are working on the church itself.
Original evaluation of the church archaeologically was done in 2018, where they removed a large mound of rubble that had been created from the 1960s demolition of the church due to it being unsafe. After that, a report was made from which we could start to figure out on how to go about excavating the church. And so at the start of this year, once this lovely tent was constructed, we started excavating the church further. We start looking at the archaeology through the different periods. So obviously we'll start off with all of the Victorian stuff and 20th century stuff and record that each piece by piece, taking it down through the layers until we get to a noticeable phase, is what we call it. Then we get the drone in and do a big drone flight and photograph the whole church area, and that's made into a 3D model using photogrammetry. And then once that's done, then we start figuring out what's next in the sequence. We've got quite a few burials now in the church where you can see these deep holes. We've got some very interesting graves in the east end of the chancel who are probably quite wealthy or high status individuals. So we thought they might be there, and they are, which is good. And at the other end, we're doing the same thing. We've just opened and excavated a sealed brick vault, which is probably 19th century or Georgian, and recorded the individual exhumed in there.
So here I've got a medieval jeton, which is not quite a coin, but they would use it for trading currency at certain merchants. So we think it's 16th century. There's some sort of inscriptions around it, and it's pretty well preserved for what it is. So usually they'll be quite degraded, but this one's quite well preserved.
So we're now standing in the south porch. This would be the main entrance into the medieval church. Now the south porch is actually of interest because this is a new discovery. We didn't realise it was here. There were no photographs or no drawings of the south porch, so it was an unexpected discovery. The south door it's a quite well detailed south door. We've got this lovely feature here at the jamb of the south door, where we've got the chamfer of the stone, the door coming up here, and the rebate at the back where the door sat. And we've got this nice feature here, a label stop, where which basically turns the chamfer into the square of the stone. It's a lovely feature here, very well carved, dates to probably about 1320, 1340, and it's a very nice detail, very finely carved. It's a special stone, that one. There were 4 columns, 1, 2, 3, 4, for the arches that separated the nave from the aisle. And you can see here they're very nicely detailed. They're mid-14th century in date, very nicely carved around here. But what's interesting about these stones is there's a couple of mason's marks on here. We've got a cross here, and these marks are sometimes interpreted as the mark that the mason makes, so that when the foreman comes at the end of the day, he knows how much stone the mason has carved, and he gets paid per stone. We can also see some chisel marks here, and this is the marks left by the chisel as the mason was working the stone, taking off all the surplus to give a nice flat surface to put the next stone on top. What we also have around here is a very shallow line running around the edge of the top of the stone, and it provides basically the template for the mason to carve the next stones in sequence up on the column. So we're now looking at the north wall of the late 11th, early 12th century church, the nave of the church here. What's interesting about the fabric of the north wall is its makeup. The flints are laid in a herringbone fashion, and that is material that's laid obliquely together like a herringbone, and that sort of work is quite typical of the late 11th, early 12th century, anything from about 1080 to about 1110, and it's a nice detail of this church. So separating the nave from the chancel is the chancel arch. What we can see is the wall coming out here that separated the nave from the chancel, and then the arch would have been there in the middle, and that would have been dividing the nave from the chancel. And we've got photographs of the chancel arch before it was demolished, and it's typical work of the early 12th century. And what we can see here is it's constructed of very finely squared and tooled limestone ashlar, very nicely detailed. We can see good markings of the chisel marks of the mason where they carved the stone. And the limestone isn't local to this area. And what's interesting about that is that the Bishop of Lincoln, who seems to have owned the land that the chapel sits on, owned quarries in Lincolnshire. He owned limestone quarries. So it's highly likely that the limestone used in the chancel arch came from the Bishop of Lincoln's own quarries in Lincolnshire. The chancel of the church has seen quite a few alterations over time. What we have here is the late 11th, early 12th century extent of the chancel, and you see it's identified by yellow sandy mortar, and you can see here there's a straight joint in the wall, and it goes over to a different fabric type, and that's where the 12th century chancel finished, and it looks like it's then been extended out, possibly in the 13th, early 14th century, and a new east wall has been put on, extending the length of the chancel. At some point, this later east wall has collapsed or it's been replaced, and the east wall has now come back to this point here where it was, and you can see that how it abuts a straight joint between the remains of the 13th century chancel and the new wall here, which we believe is about the 15th century.
I think it's like the most interesting part of archaeology is when you can see how people lived and how people interacted with material culture and buildings. With a site, you normally only excavate a small portion, and so you get a tiny sort of like window into a bigger picture, whereas here we've excavated the whole area around this church, and so we've understood how the church fits in the landscape with all the other archaeology that we've got, from medieval buildings outside of the church to Roman archaeology on the hill and prehistoric stuff. It kind of gives you a picture that you don't normally get.